Hello, everyone. Jeremy here. I've been online for the last couple days since the whole incident in Vegas, listening to a variety of people talk about the whole gun issue. And a lot of people are calling for gun restrictions, more gun laws, bans on certain types of guns, certain types of triggers, and all of this stuff because of what happened in Vegas. And what happened in Vegas is horrible, it's disgusting, it's evil, and there's no other way to describe it. And my heart goes out to anyone that was affected by it directly or indirectly. But this idea that we need more laws relating to guns in order to solve this issue is horribly misguided, and I want to explain why these ideas are horribly misguided. But I do understand why people are coming up with these reasons. It is human nature to want to solve problems, especially problems that create this much misery and this much pain. You see, our subconscious mind is designed to protect us. And when it perceives danger, it wants to find not only a reason for that danger, which is step one. We need to find a reason why this happened. And that's why everyone is trying to understand the mentality of this sick person. And why did he do this? Why? Everyone wants to know the why. But the thing is, you may never know the why. But people can't stand that, so they're desperate to figure out a reason. And that's because your subconscious mind wants a reason. Because when it has a reason, then it can predict it in the future. It needs to be able to predict things. It hates the unknown. So, and this is an unknown. It's unknown why this person did what he did. And it may remain an unknown for all of eternity. And we have to learn to accept that. We may never know what this person was doing or why they were doing it. And that freaks people out, and I get that. People do not like not knowing. And this generates all kinds of emotions. Anger, fear, a variety of negative emotions. And people want to get rid of those negative emotions, and they feel compelled to do something. All of us feel compelled to do something. So I understand the mentality behind these people calling for more gun regulations and more laws to ban or whatever they might think will help the situation. But that's coming from an emotional place. And you can't solve this with emotional-based solutions. They have to be based in logic and reason. And I'm seeing way too many people trying to address this issue emotionally with these ideas of gun laws. Now, I want to explain to you why more gun laws is a horrible idea. It's misguided, it's not logical, it's not reasonable, and I want people to understand why it's not reasonable and why it will never work in the case of what happened in Vegas. And it's for one simple reason, and I want you to hear this. Laws, in of themselves, have no power. No law, in of itself, has any power to change what people do. They're useless in of themselves. What gives a law power is two things. One, the consequence you attach to the law. That's the first thing that gives a law power. A law by itself is useless. Like if I told you it was against the law to walk across the street. Technically it is. But let's say I just said it's against the law to walk across the street. Your first question would be, well, what would happen if I do? Well, nothing. There's no consequence. It's just against the law to walk across the street. Well, if there's no consequence, it's not going to do anything to stop people that want to walk across the street. They know it's against the law, but if there's no consequence attached to it, it will have zero effect on stopping people. Because anyone that wants to cross the street is going to continue to cross the street. So consequence is the number one thing. Let me give you another example. Let's say you had a highway and the speed limit was 65 miles an hour. And on this particular highway, the punishment was $1 for every 10 miles you went over the speed limit. So if you went 30 miles over the speed limit, you would be fined $3. Now in that case, how many people would continue to speed? Well, the people that wanted to speed or go over the speed limit, the majority of them would continue to speed. Why? Because the punishment's not that bad. Now say I had a second highway where the speed limit was also 65 miles an hour. But in this highway, it's a $100 fine for every 10 miles you go over. So in this case, if you go 30 over, that's a $300 fine. How many people do you think would speed on that highway? Much less. Only those desperate to drive that fast would do it. Because that's multiple $100s in fines versus a couple dollars over here. In both cases, the law is the same. In both cases, its speed limit is 65 miles an hour. The law is identical. But the one that fines you $100 for every 10 miles over versus the one that only fines you $1 for every 10 miles over, the $100 one will cause people to change their actions much more than the other one because the consequence is higher. Again, a law by itself is meaningless. It's the consequence. How much of a consequence is associated with the law? Now, there is a second factor that goes into establishing the power of a law. Not only do you have the consequence, but you have the probability of being prosecuted. That's the second factor that goes into what gives a law power, is how likely you are to get caught and how likely you are to have to suffer the consequence. To give you an example of this, if you watch movies or listen to music or whatever, you always see those disclaimers about pirating. And it says something like, $25,000 fine and up to 5 years in prison. That's a steep consequence. Most people do not want to pay a $25,000 fine or spend up to 5 years in prison. So you would think that law of not pirating movies, for example, would be effective. But the reality is it's not effective. Why? Because the perceived consequence is such that people don't think they're going to get caught. No matter how big a consequence is, if you don't think you're going to get caught, then that consequence has no power. So again, the only two things that give a law power to changing people's actions is the consequence and the probability of someone suffering that consequence if they break the law. So now let's look at mass shooters. Now I'm specifically talking about things like the event in Vegas. This is a mass shooting. And people talk all the time about, what religion was he? What political party was he? Some people even talk about race, which is just stupid. But people always try to find these factors. And the reality is none of those really matter. Yes, most mass shootings are done by men. That is statistically true. But even that's not really important for understanding the dynamics of this. All of these factors, religion, political parties, all of these factors really don't matter. Because there is one thing that almost always happens with every mass shooting that we should focus on. And that is the shooter ends up dead. Think about that. Almost every mass shooting you hear about, the shooter ends up dead. Once in a while they get taken into custody, but typically they either kill themselves before they are taken into custody, or they go out in a blaze of glory and commit suicide by cop, where they know they're going to die. But here's the interesting thing about mass shooters. The vast majority of them know they are going to die. They go into this situation, they go into doing this evil act knowing by the end of it they're going to die. They've accepted the idea of dying. They're so determined or so twisted, whichever the case may be, to go out and do this evil act. They're so determined to do it that they are willing to die in order to do it. Because most mass shooters know they're going to die. The vast majority of them know that they're going to kill themselves before they are captured. They go in with that mentality. Or a few of them think they might escape. Some of them think that they're smart enough or good enough that they'll escape. But usually when they find out that they're not able to escape, then they end up killing themselves or again go out in a blaze of glory. One of those two scenarios. But the reality is most of them end up dead. And this is where the problem lies in all these gun law ideas that everyone keeps mentioning or pushing for. These mass shooters have accepted the consequence of death. Think about that. A person that goes in to commit mass murder has accepted the consequence of death. Because even if they get captured, let's say they don't commit suicide, and let's say they don't go out in a blaze of glory, and the cops come in and they actually capture them, which is rare, but it does happen. Even if they get captured, the legal system, odds are, is going to put them to death. If you go out and kill 50 people, the courts are probably going to put you to death. Unless you are in a state that doesn't have the death penalty, then it's life in prison. But chances are, if you go out and kill 50 people, you're going to end up dead. One of three ways. Suicide, blaze of glory, or the court system's going to kill you. It's that simple. So these people have accepted the consequence of death. That means any law associated with this situation, associated with this event, this mass shooting they want to do, any law that has a consequence below death is going to have zero power. And death is pretty high. I don't know a consequence you can come up with that exceeds death. You know, maybe mass torture for months on end. But the reality is, any gun law you try to create, the consequence you try to attach to those gun laws is going to be way lower than death. Way lower. And because of that, it's going to have zero effect on these people. Because they know they're never going to have to experience those consequences. What are you going to do? They're dead. They've accepted the fact that they're going to die, and by the end of the event, they're going to be dead. And they know that. So there's absolutely nothing you can do from a legal standpoint to keep them from doing this. There is not a gun law you can create with a consequence. Again, that's the most important part. The law itself is meaningless. It's the consequence you attach to that law and the probability of them experiencing that consequence. Well, when they're dead, there is a 0 chance of them experiencing whatever consequence you come up with. 0. They're dead. They're not going to have to experience any consequence you attach to any gun law that you can create, which is why in the case of mass shootings, such as what happened in Vegas, there is not a single gun law you can create, none, that will stop this from happening. Because again, the consequence and the probability of that consequence being carried out against that person are both meaningless to them. They're going to be dead. They've already accepted a consequence that's way above anything you can create for these gun laws. So please stop with this misguided notion that we need to create this law or ban this or ban that. None of that will work. And I understand why people are pushing for this stuff, because they want to do something. They want to stop this from happening because it is awful. It is evil. It is insanely disturbing for your average person who has an average psychology. But understand, you are responding to these events in a knee-jerk, emotional way. And that will never solve the problem. Never. We have to focus on other things. We have to focus on ways that maybe we can stop them sooner. Mental health is a big issue. Understanding drugs people are taking, because a lot of times certain drugs are involved. Not always, but sometimes. We need to understand better on how these drugs are affecting people. I'm a big advocate for way more cameras and surveillance in public places. I'm totally against surveillance of people in their private lives. You know, email, communications, all that. I'm against that. But cameras in the public domain with people monitoring, people watching those events as they're happening, maybe we can have a better idea. This guy brought up a ton of stuff up, and no one noticed it. We need people trained to notice these things a little more. And my envision of the future is I actually anticipate or hope that if we did have more surveillance, that we could maybe put some type of AI connected to those surveillance to maybe see patterns that humans just don't pick up on. But a lot of people freak out about that, and I understand, the whole Big Brother hooking computers up. But if it's in the public domain, I'm not as concerned. My concern is surveillance and all of that stuff in the private domain, violating people's privacy. That's where the line is drawn for me personally. But again, there's all kinds of ideas, and there's no real way to know which idea is better than other ideas. But the bottom line for this video wasn't for me to address my ideas, because there's countless ideas out there, and we could debate about the ideas all day long, and we need to have that debate. We need to have an honest, open debate on real solutions. But the point of this video, the point I'm trying to make with this video, is that gun laws, banning guns, banning certain accessories to guns, all of those ideas will never work. So please, we need to stop as a society pushing forth those ideas. Because the only people that follow gun laws are people that follow laws. And people that follow laws are not the people committing mass murder. You get that? The only people affected by gun laws are those people that follow the law. And people that follow the laws are not the people committing mass murder. Why? Because mass murder is already against the law. It is against the law to kill someone. And it is very much against the law to kill 50 people. Get it? Alright, that's my rant and rave, whatever you want to call it. Bottom line, gun laws don't work. Let's stop with the stupid ideas. We need to address real solutions, real ideas, based on logic and reason, not our emotional, instinctive responses. Again, I'm Jeremy Jordan. Have a great day.